everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Vinyl Tales, where we spin tales about vinyl. Today's song is a classic children's song. It's influenced beloved TV specials, multiple parodies, and even a rocket ship. This popular and very important song was not only based on a poem written by a friend, but that poem was written in the spur of the moment. The writer had just read another poem on his way to meet some friends for dinner, and it gave him an idea. However, this idea was kind of stuck in his head. He couldn't get it out. He couldn't make it go away. So, he wrote it down to get it out. He never once expected this poem that he had just come up with in the blink of an eye to get as big as it did, or to become as big a staple as it has since become. Learn this story and all the cool details surrounding it on today's episode of Vinyl Tales. Okay, now everyone, before I get into today's story, there's something I want to say. I created this channel as a way for me to tell all of these cool stories that I run across while I'm going through my own records. This gives me a way to talk about all these cool stories and all these cool facts with others. However, due to a lack of interest in this show, a lack of interest in this whole channel, I'm considering bringing this whole show to an end. If you like this show, if you like this kind of stuff, please let me know. Give me your thoughts. However, if no one says anything, then, like I said, I am considering ending this show due to a lack of interest. But with that said, it's time to get into that story. It starts back in the first half of the 20th century. Sometime around 1930, a man named Ogden Nash was working as an editor for a major publishing company called Doubleday. While working for this publishing company, he had written some short rhymes in his spare time. During this time, the magazine titled The New Yorker, which you may have heard of, had only been out for a few years, and it was rising in popularity. After he had written these short rhymes, Nash wanted to share them with people. So he thought that he would submit them to the magazine The New Yorker and just kind of see what they said. Obviously, he wasn't sure if they would even like the stuff that he wrote. So imagine his surprise when he actually got a letter from the magazine's editor, Harold Ross, asking for more material. Harold Ross had read the stuff that Nash had submitted to the magazine, and he thought it was actually pretty good. He said that those rhymes were some of the most original stuff that they'd had lately, and he wanted more. He wanted to continue to publish this guy's things in his magazine. After receiving this news, Nash had now been given the possibility of a career in writing. So, he spent 3 months in the following year, 1931, working as an editor for that New Yorker magazine, and later that same year, he would go on to publish his first collection of poems that he had written, titled Hard Lines. This collection of poems earned him national recognition, and he would follow it up by going on to write more than 500 pieces. One of these would be a poem that he wrote and published just a few years later after Hardlines in 1936. This new poem was a children's poem and is described as most likely being his most famous children's poem out of all the poems that he wrote. This supposedly famous 1936 poem is called The Tale of Custard the Dragon. He wrote it as a ballad kind of poem, or a short story presented with parody. It's about a woman named Belinda and her pets. Belinda has 4 pets. She has a kitten, a mouse, a dog, and a dragon. Their names are Ink, Blink, Mustard, and Custard. That's a lot of fun to say, by the way. Everyone in the house likes to constantly brag about themselves and boast about their bravery, all except for Custard the dragon. Custard, despite being a scary-looking dragon, is actually a big coward. He gets tickled and teased all the time by the others. They take his cowardness for granted and make fun of him while calling him names. One of the names they call him is Percival. Because the others are always treating him like this, he cries for a nice, safe cage that he can sit in and be away from all the mistreatment and jokes. One day, a pirate breaks into their house with a pistol in each hand. Everyone gets scared by the intruder, and they all flee in panic, except for Custard, the coward. Custard, the cowardly dragon, stays behind. Instead of fleeing like fear, just like everyone else in the house, he stays behind to stand up to the pirate. He chases the pirate down, and he eats him like a cheeseburger. Immediately afterwards, now that the danger is over, everyone comes back home. Custard, having proved to be the bravest of the bunch, finally gets praised and complimented by everyone. But it only lasts for a short time. Eventually things go back to normal, where Belinda, Ink, Blink, and Mustard are constantly boasting about themselves and making fun of Custard for being a coward, despite being a dragon. And Custard continues to ask for a nice, safe cage for him to sit in. Now, if this story sounds familiar, that might be because of what happened in 1959. Because that year, the tale of Custard the Dragon inspired another poem that would grow to be known and loved by all children. Back in 1959, a 19-year-old teenager named Lenny Lipton was attending Cornell University. One day, while he was feeling a little homesick, the 19-year-old university student was on his way to a friend's house for dinner. He was a little early, and so he thought that he would stop by the library on the way. While he was there, at the library, he ended up reading some Ogden Nash poems. The title of the one in particular that caught his attention was a poem called The Tale of Custard the Dragon. After some time had passed, and he figured he'd better get going and head on over to his friend's house before he's late and misses dinner, he gets up and he leaves the library. While he's walking over to his friend's place, During the walk, that poem about Custer the Dragon stuck in his head. He liked the poem so much that he had created his own version of the poem, simply on his way to dinner. But he just couldn't get it out of his head. When he finally got to his friend's house, no one was home. It turns out that there had been a mix-up about dinner, and neither his friend nor his friend's housemate was actually there. Now, even though no one was home at his friend's house when he arrived, due to that mix-up, since he was already there, and he had this poem stuck in his head that he just couldn't get out, he decided to just go on inside. And he knew that his friend's housemate had a typewriter. And so he figured, since he was already at their house and he had this poem he couldn't get out of his head, and this friend of his friends had a typewriter ready to go, he figured he'd just go inside real quick, sit down at the typewriter, and use the typewriter to write down this poem, get it on paper so it would get out of his head. Afterwards, when he had finished typing it out, now that this poem that he had created in his head just a little while earlier had been written down and was finally out of his head so he could focus on other things, he then left and he returned to his own place. A while later, after Lipton's friend, housemate, came back to the house, he noticed that something had been typed up on his typewriter. But since this was during exam time, being a university student as well, because all three of them were university students at the university, he just ignored it and he decided to focus on his exams. Eventually, he did go over and pick it up, and he checked it out. On this piece of paper that had been left in his typewriter was a strange new poem that he had never read before. When he read this poem about the loss of childhood, he loved it. Even though his mutual friend, Lenny Lipton, had just typed it out in order to get it out of his head and had no real intentions for it, this guy was a songwriter, and he decided to take this poem that had just been left in his typewriter and he turned it into a song. After taking this poem, writing a few more lines, and adding some music to it, Peter Yarrow, or Yarrow, however you want to pronounce his last name, Peter Yarrow had created a new song that would go on to become more popular than he could have imagined. A couple years later, in 1961, Peter Yarrow was in New York City, where he met Paul Stookey and Mary Travers. The three became good friends, and shortly after, they formed the group Peter, Paul, and Mary. Their self-titled debut album came out the following year in 1962. On this album, they did a few children's songs, and they seemed to go over well with their fans. And so later in 1962, when they were working on recording their second album, titled Moving, they thought that they'd go ahead and put some more children's songs on the second album as well. This being the case, Peter Yarrow suggested that they include the song that he had written back in 1959, inspired by a piece of paper that had simply been left in his typewriter. He figured that since they had already been singing and performing this song since the very beginning of their group anyway, that they should just go ahead and include this song on their second album. So when Peter, Paul, and Mary released their second album, Moving, in January 1963, they included this fun children's song in the track list. When the trio released Moving in January 1963, their first couple of singles didn't really do all that well. The first one wasn't really liked all that much, and the second one just barely made it onto the charts, but it only managed to stay there for a few weeks. This being the case, they decided to release this fun little children's song as the third single from the album. And so later, in January 1963, Peter, Paul, and Mary released Puff the Magic Dragon. Shortly after it was released as a single, a DJ somewhere out in the northwest of the U.S. got a hold of the song, and he played it. The moment that he played the song over the radio, Puff the Magic Dragon kind of took on a life of its very own. It instantly took off and became extremely popular. It made it up to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it made it up to number 1, the top spot on the adult contemporary charts. A few years after the song had become such an enormous hit, Peter Yarrow tracked down his old friend and made sure to get Lenny Lipton half of the songwriting credit. Now, he was confused at first because he didn't realize that this song that they were singing was that piece of paper that he had typed up that day when he missed dinner with his friends. That just random poem that popped in his head after reading that other one that he just couldn't get out. When he realized that that's where this song came from, he was gracious for the attempt to track him down and give him some of the credit. It has since been lost. However, the original poem that Lipton had written, and that piece of paper that he typed on and left in the typewriter, had one last verse that just didn't quite make it into the song. If you're familiar with this song, it ends with Puff going back into his cave. This last verse takes place after that. In this last verse, or lost verse, because neither of them can remember it in very much detail anymore, Puff finds yet another child and plays with them some as well after having returned to his cave and leaving Jackie Paper. Now, if you've ever seen that late 70s animated TV special, Puff the Magic Dragon, it's from 1978 and it's about a half hour long, as well as either of its 2 sequels, Puff the Magic Dragon in the Land of the Living Lies from 1979, and Puff and the Incredible Mr. Nobody from 1980. They're all about a half hour long, but especially that first one, that first TV special from 1978, Puff the Magic Dragon, is based on the song by Peter, Paul, and Mary from 1963. Also, in the mid-70s, a band named Ruach created a parody of this song. This group was an American Jewish band, so I'm sure you can imagine what this song was like. It's called Puff the Kosher Dragon. Now, in this song, Kosher Puff eats kosher food, fights anti-Semites, and he even has his own bar mitzvah. In the end, Puff marries and raises his own kids in the Jewish faith. Kind of a strange concept after going from the original song. In more recent times, if you've seen the movie Meet the Parents, Puff the Magic Dragon is the favorite song of the character Jack Burns. In the sequel movie to that, Meet the Fockers, Jack has rigged up the horn of his RV to play the first few notes of Puff the Magic Dragon. Also, Elon Musk said that he named his Dragon spacecraft, launched by SpaceX, after the song Puff the Magic Dragon. And finally, during the Vietnam War, there was even a type of military airplane that was nicknamed Dragon. Eventually, that nickname caught on, and the American troops that flew it started to call this AC-47 aircraft Puff the Magic Dragon after the famous song. But that's all that I got for you today. Puff the Magic Dragon, that great movie, great little TV short from the late 70s, is based on an amazing song from the early 60s. It was written because a friend of the writer left a piece of paper in his typewriter for him to find. The friend who came up with the idea read an older poem, and the idea just kind of popped in his head, kind of like a different style of fan fiction. This older poem came out in 1936 and was written by a poet who wrote hundreds of poems. However, this one in particular has gone on quite the journey. But if you've got other cool stories or facts about songs or albums, or if you liked this episode, you liked this story, let me know. Also, like I said earlier, due to a lack of interest in this show and my effort that it goes into actually looking these things up, due to a lack of interest in this show that has been shown, I am considering ending it. And so if you would like to see this show continue, please also give me your thoughts on that as well, as to whether or not you like the story or you have other cool stories for me to look up and talk about in future episodes. In the meantime, like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. My name is Brandon. This has been Vinyl Tales, where we spin tales about vinyl. And I will see you later.